Welcome to the Expert and the Idiot. I'm here with Roy Stewart of Tierra de Morelia. Welcome, Roy. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk shop with you today. I was curious what got you into the hobby? When did it start?
Um, I've been into keeping for maybe 15 years now. I grew up probably like a lot of us, keeping and catching stuff native to wherever you're living. And it wasn't until maybe
Where was
15
that?
years ago, Wisconsin. So I grew
Okay.
up in South Central Wisconsin, the Madison area.
Okay.
So we kept a lot of, frogs, toads, common snakes, things like that, salamanders. And
All
then it
native
wasn't
stuff.
until, what's that?
All native stuff.
Yeah, that was just seasonal, keeping it in the garage
Yeah,
over the summer, letting it go in the fall.
right on.
Yep. It wasn't until after college that I got into keeping, first pair of pythons were ball pythons and a couple of not crested geckos. What were they? Bearded dragons. And then started real slow, just a couple of pets just for fun. Those are my first, kind of captive bred type animals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When when did you actually start breeding? Did you start breeding that first pair of ball pythons?
No, ended up being males, so they
Oh,
didn't breed. It wasn't until we moved out to Colorado in 2008, and that's when I started building my collection. And it started mostly with carpets. I think I had my first clutch. My first clutch was ball pythons in 2012. My first clutch of carpets was 2013.
right on. So
Yep.
what do you think actually drew you towards reptiles? Like what do you think triggered that?
It started just with a natural interest in wildlife in general. We grew up in the outdoors doing a lot of fishing, hunting. My dad is a biologist. Um, there was always that natural interest in wildlife. And for me, I went the route of, observing, keeping, and then just the natural interest in the animals. You want to experience everything about them, bring it full circle and breed them, and experience everything that they're capable of.
What was your dad doing as a biologist?
He's a fisheries biologist, so he worked for the DNR for a number of years.
Right on.
Yep.
So that exposure must have just got you more and more interested in wildlife and all
Yeah,
that,
he was
right?
very much an outdoorsman, you know. So that trickles down and everyone in my family. My brother went more of the route kind of following him, where most of his time outside of work is spent in the field, fishing, hunting, trapping, things like that. I went a different direction.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you got out to Colorado, and what were you doing for work out there, and then what kind of drove you deeper into the hobby when you started picking up more and more species?
For work, I've always been in the intellectual and developmental disability field. So I did a lot of case management work, providing support, in-home community-based services for folks with a disability. And we lived out there for about 12 years, maybe an hour outside of Denver. And it was at that point that I really started digging into carpets and then pythons in general, and really started building and expanding the collection.
How many
Started
species are you at now?
pythons, I think 15, and then I have some other odds and ends, boas and colubrids.
What kind of boas?
I focus strictly on the island type boas. So your hog islands, pearl, crawl K, cocker K.
Right on.
Yeah.
So your primary species that you're most passionate about is the carpets.
Yeah, it's the Morelia genus. I don't know that I can say just carpets. You have to, I have to include the Brettles and the green trees in there as well.
You keep green trees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How,
not nearly as many, but I've always had a couple of those guys kicking around as well.
what do you think about their difficulty level for keeping green trees?
You know, they, in my experience, they do have some a little bit different parameters. I don't think they're difficult. I think maybe there's just more of a more narrow range you kind of have to stay within. And as long as you're in that range, I think they're very easy. But there are, if you go outside of that, you can have some challenges they may not handle as well as some of the other species in Morelia.
Right on. So primarily you're into Morelia, but I know that you've got some other stuff, right? Apodora and uh uh you're into bloods and short tails as well, right?
Yeah, Bloods and Short Tails is probably my next biggest group after Morelia. I don't have any Borneos, but I do have a pretty nice collection of Bloods and Sumatran Short Tails.
Nice. What do you think of them as a pet?
They're great. They're, I'd say, similar to the green trees in that they have a little bit narrower range you kind of need to stay within in order to meet all their needs and keep them doing really well. But as long as you're in there, again, they're very simple. They're To me, they're really interesting because it's such a, you hear a lot of people say it's a big snake feel and a small snake package, and it really is true. They have a lot of compact muscle, and they command a certain amount of respect, in my opinion, and really interesting animals to work with. The Sumatrans, especially, I think they can all be great pets. I think some are more natural, I think some kind of go that route more naturally. Others take more time to kind of build that trust. And I think they're a little more twitchy and nervous, than some other species of python. But a lot of those stereotypes that are still around are probably from the wild caught animals that were coming in and just a real bear to deal with from what I've heard.
Yeah, every time I see them, they look nervous as hell. Like they look like they're just kind of like pushed back, like what's about to happen, and but I guess if you were to work with them and learn their personality, you'd probably get past that eventually.
Yeah.
What's your biggest short tail? Like how big do you have them? Because I see them all over the place. Where some, you see them where it's a breeding pair and they don't look like they're maybe more than 3.5 feet, and then I'll see another one. I've seen a picture of one that was he had to be between 5.5 and 6 foot, and just monstrous. So much snake within that length, just so thick and muscular. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't have any that long. I guess I would lean more towards measuring them in weight and girth.
Yeah.
I'd say my biggest girls, I don't have any that are older than 11 years old. And my biggest female blood is probably 14, 15 pounds, maybe 4 feet or so, 4.5
Yeah.
at the most.
What drew you to them? I mean, they're so different than Morelia. Morelia's semi-arboreal and or
Mhm.
full-blown arboreal, and so it's such a different thing. Is it that contrast that you're drawn to?
You know, I think pythons in general, they have so many different things to offer, depending on what you're interested in and looking for. You have if you really like to play around with morphs and paint jobs, you have your ball pythons. Bloods can give you that as well. If you like the arboreal, more athletic type snakes, there's a lot of snakes that check those boxes. The bloods and short tails are just on the other end of the spectrum, and I like the maybe some snakes that are underrated, misunderstood, and they give you, I think, once you have some experience under your belt and you want to really kind of study the animals and learn from them, I think bloods and short tails give you a lot along that line, because they are, I think, misunderstood by a lot of people, and some of those stereotypes don't need to be around anymore. They're more of the type of animal, they do look like you were saying, how they're always kind of cocked and ready to go and spring, and they're definitely capable of doing that, and maybe not as tolerant and patient of stimuli going around, out in front of them. But once you do take the time, and build some trust with that animal, they're very easy to work with. Generally don't offer to strike. They just kind of have some particularities about them where, you can't do anything to them, to most of them, maybe like a ball python. They're a little more particular in how they prefer to be held, supported, and what they have going on around them, and how they may respond to that.
Right on. You keep scrubs as well, right?
Well, here in Florida, you can't keep them all. We can keep you can keep everything, I guess, except for kinghorn eye and amethystina. So I have, just a few kicking around, some Moluccans and Halmaheras.
Oh, nice. I like the Halmaheras a lot. What's your experience been with them?
I don't have a very big group or a ton of experience, but the animals that I've worked with, I'll say, have been the most challenging for me as a keeper, to acclimate, to read and kind of help them do as well as they can, keeping stress levels low and whatnot. They're a challenge, but they're, if you like those lean, big-eyed, athletic brown snakes, they're much better than that.
What's been most challenging about keeping them? Just because do you think it has to do primarily with that they're wild caught and just getting them acclimated to captivity?
Yeah, mine came in, I think they were pretty fresh, and they're just very nervous, shy, anxious, however you want to interpret their behavior, snakes, and they didn't take off, right away, like a lot of things you may get in. It took me a good couple of months to get one to even take a meal, and more than that for the other. And they're, I don't know, I guess once you kind of figure them out and understand, what their triggers are and what their preferences are, it took a good couple of years for them to come out of their shell and really seem like they're more comfortable.
What did you start them off with feeding? How'd you get them going?
I ended up just having to drop feed, smaller items, keep them in a fairly small tub, reduce a lot of stimuli around them. One of them I had to basically completely black out, so there weren't any shadows or anything going on that they could see. It took a good 3 months, I think, for me to finally get the other one to take its first meal.
And you were doing mice or rats or quail or?
I don't remember. I probably tried a number of different rodent species, and I think they finally ended up. I remember having to reduce the size. These are animals that were pretty snug in like a sweater box tub size or so. Maybe like a 25 by 15 size tub, give or take. And I think the first meal they took was roughly like a rat pup sized meal. Definitely a lot smaller than what they're capable of taking.
Yeah. Can you define drop feeding?
Yeah. So instead of offering the prey on a tongs or live, a drop would just be dropping it in the tub, closing the tub, and letting them take it on their own in their own time.
How long would you normally leave it in there? Like overnight?
Yep, overnight.
Right on. How about the Apodora?
What about them?
What drew you to them? How many do you have? Kind of, I'm always curious about that. Any species that isn't very commonly kept, I'm always curious about, and their personality, just overall experience.
Sure. Yeah, Apodora, I've been working with I have 2 pairs, one wild caught, one captive bred, for about 3-4 years. They're I'd say the most interesting species I've worked with. They give you a lot to offer, as far as differences, quirks. Their personality is really unique. You hear people talk about their strength, and that's something that's not overstated, and it's something you have to experience with your own hands to fully appreciate. The squeeze that those things have is nuts. They tend to be a very different animal in my experience in their cage compared to when they're out in hand. That's been really unique. I'd say my wild caught ones, I would quote unquote trust more than a lot of my other snakes that are captive bred. They give you a feel and a confidence once you have them out of the cage and in hand, because they're very different in the cage. They tend to be very cage defensive, territorial, but once they're out and they're in hand, the switch seems to flip, and it happens every time. And they're very easy to work with. You got to be ready for a big, strong snake, because they are that.
Is that so? What's the difference between the wild caught and the captive bred with them? Is there a big contrast in their behavior and personality? And
a lot of it might just be maybe size related. A lot of the younger pythons by nature, as they should be, they're defensive. That's the survival mechanism. So my captive bred ones I got as babies. So one of them, the male, that switch still doesn't flip for him necessarily once he's out and in hand. He's still very defensive, alert, but he's coming around. So I'm confident that with some more time, he's going to be similar to my captive bred female and both of the wild caughts. He seems to be turning a corner.
Nice.
It's like a lot of the carpets, we talk about, they tend to be real defensive first, but with time, age, size, regardless of how much you may work with them, most of them will be pretty easy to work with.
What size cage do you keep them in?
My big adults are in an 8x3.
Wow.
8 foot long by 3 foot deep by 2 feet tall.
That's impressive.
Give them plenty of space. They're, especially when you're thinking about pairing, I didn't want to go too small, and hopefully that'll be big enough. We'll see.
They like being up off the ground a lot?
I thought about building shelves in there and offering perches, but I just don't have the right I think idea or strategy to be able to put something in there that they're not going to tear out of the wall. They're so strong. So for that reason, they don't have any opportunity to get up off the ground except sitting on top of the big hides.
Yeah. Yeah. I have grapevine lag screwed onto the side of my cages just because I'm nervous about it falling on something,
I saw one cage with a an idea that I think would probably work better than any, and it was basically a suspended ledge where it's not attached to any walls. hanging from the ceiling, with maybe like four PVC pipes with maybe like a flange, connecting it from the top of the cage.
Yeah.
And that way, it spreads out the weight and the strength, if they were to climb up and pull on it. But even then, I was like, like I can't imagine what these things are going to be like when they're 12 or 13 feet, and 30 plus pounds. So for now, it doesn't seem to affect their musculature at all to not have any opportunity to climb. They got plenty of room to cruise, and they can get on top of those hides if they want. So maybe I'll add something with time. I just need to be sure it's going to work and not end up in cage repair,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Do you still keep ball pythons?
I do. I have maybe 25 or 30 adults.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect that.
Yeah, I've been trimming down my ball python collection, over the last year or two, but I do still work with a fair few of those. I think I got 4 or 5 clutches last year. I don't know that I'll get any this year, but I do still have those.
With the Morelia, what do you keep with the Morelia? Obviously, I know you keep jungles because I got one from you.
Yep, got plenty of jungles kicking around.
How many pairs of jungles do you have, or how many jungles do you have in general?
Probably 6 or 8 adults, somewhere in there.
Right on.
Yep. I work with all of the subspecies within Morelia, Spilota, with the exception of, the newly classified McDowell. So I don't have any of the southern coastals. I don't have any of the imbricata, southwestern. But I have everything else.
Right on.
Yep.
How many do you have of everything else? Is it just like a pair? Are you keeping some as just pets, just to have them and keep them, or do you have breeding plans with all of them?
It's hard to reason for me. Like, everything's part of a project, so they're all part of a plan, to do something with. I have groups of everything, so I don't have just a single pair of anything. I've had, you and I were talking about this, right? If you want to, truly work on a project and try to produce something, you might get lucky and be able to do it with a pair. But if something goes sideways, that project is over. So I like to have at least 2.2, preferably, at least 3.2. But most of my groups are a lot bigger than that.
So you opt to go with more males than females?
Yeah, just to have, at least, depending on the species, I generally have at least a 1-to-1 ratio. And if I'm going to lean one way, it's usually with males. For one, you can have more and then more options without them taking up as much of a footprint of space.
Mm-hmm.
And then it allows you to kind of, if you do ever have a male who's not motivated, something happens to, it's good to have animals on deck, so to speak.
Yeah. What do you keep your jungles in?
Jungles I keep in display cages for the most part. Babies, you start kind of moving them up through tub sizes, and then as adults, I keep females in usually a 4x2. Males are in a 3x2. Smaller adults I'll keep like in this rack behind me, the ARS 8500 series, which is roughly a 3 foot by 2 foot footprint with about 9 inches of height. I'll keep my smaller adults in something like that.
When do you graduate them to the 4x2, the females? Like about what age?
It usually ends up being maybe, 4 or 5 years of age, somewhere in there, depending on the animal. Some of them don't ever get that big to really need that. I have most of my poplar carpets are in 3x2s. I don't have any that are bigger and really need anything bigger than that. You know, they have, I'm not sure if you can see, but the display cases behind me, those are 3x2s. They have,
Okay.
you know, multiple perches built in there. I'm working on adding arboreal hides as well. So they have plenty of opportunity to use every inch of that space.
Yeah, the sky hides.
Yeah, I've added those for some, and they're great, and they seem to really use them and love them. So it's a long-term project because I have a lot of cages to install those in, and I have to kind of tweak all of my built-in perches to accommodate them. But they seem to really like those. Every cage that I put them in so far, they're used quite a bit.
Yeah, I have just tubs that I'm keeping all my carpets in right now because they're all so young, and I hang a like a paper towel tube cut in half in there from some paracord, and every single one of them goes inside there, and they just even it's surprising how large they can be and how they'll just compress themselves into that space. They seem to really like that confined area.
Yep. Yeah, there's a number of ways you can do it. You know, however you want to offer them that opportunity to get up and to perch up off the ground with the babies. You know, I give them like a little piece of fencing, you know, little kind of like arch over the hide in the water bowl, and they seem to use that quite a bit. You know, either sitting on top of it, sitting underneath it. I think it helps with the feeding response as you're getting babies established as well, to allow them to get up off the ground and, you know, feel like they're hunting something down below.
Yeah. How do you keep your centralians?
Pretty much the same as the adult female carpets. 4x2s, perches, and they'll have those sky hides as well.
Right on. How often do you feed, just in general, with most of your Morelia?
Adults?
Yeah.
Adults, it's pretty seasonal, you know, so I'd say during the seasons when they're feeding, you know, it's a little heavier in the spring, heavier in the fall, at least for the females. Males, probably a little less so. And then the summer is a little more sparing. I'd say somewhere in the range of, you know, every 2 to 3 weeks for females, maybe every 3, sometimes less for males, depending on the size. You know, it's not, for me, the way I do it is not necessarily a regiment where it's every, you know, this size prey every, you know, so many weeks. It will vary, but, you know, if I give an animal a larger meal, you know, then I might give it a little bit longer until it gets its next one. And then when it comes to winter, generally I don't really feed much of any Morelia. The females, you know, I may give 1 or 2, just kind of depending on what I'm seeing, maybe more, but males generally get off. I shut them down for about 3 months over the winter, and I think they do pretty well with that seasonal feeding.
It's pretty wild. You know, if you're on any Facebook groups, you see so many people just panicking about their animals cycling off food. And it seems to generally be during the winter. You know, whether you're in a group with people in Australia or America, you see that as they go into winter, they start panicking because their male doesn't want to eat anymore. It makes you wonder if that's just their natural inclination. And even if you're not temperature cycling them, they just sense the there's going to be a temperature difference no matter what. You know, even if you regulate your temperature in your house, it's going to be colder during the winter no matter where you are. So it makes you wonder if they just sense that, and then that's what makes them stop eating.
Yeah, you know, I think that's one of the things that comes with experience, and I find myself, at least personally, just always learning and picking up new things. Just the thing that you can't really understand until you experience it And if you have more animals, it's a larger sample size, so you may learn quicker. It's just what the animals are telling you, observe them, read them as best you can, and try to, listen to what they're telling you with their behavior.
Yeah. Do you keep any lizards? I know you mentioned keeping bearded dragons when you were in Colorado.
Nothing with legs. The only thing we have with legs is one dog.
Huh.
I had those bearded dragons. That was actually the first reptile I produced. We got a small clutch of beardies. But no, we haven't had any lizards in years.
Is there
Yeah,
anything that
they're
is there anything that catches your eye that might bring you back to them, or are you just sticking with snakes now?
for snake. I don't have any plans to add any, but I was at Tinley a few months ago, and I have to say the tree monitors are pretty impressive, pretty unique animals.
What draws
But
you to them?
the arboreal nature is pretty interesting. The the color, the pattern, the body type. They seem to be a real athletic type animal. But lizards, generally speaking, my kids are getting up in the background. They're just, I guess, with as many animals as I have and the full-time job and family, everything else, trying to balance in life. I just don't have time to take on an animal that's going to require more care. They seem to be higher maintenance, at least from the
For
lizard
sure.
species that I'm somewhat familiar with. But someday I'd love to add on, a tree monitor or a water monitor or something like that.
Yeah, same here. I've been toying with the idea of getting a black dragon, especially being in Florida, being able to keep it in an outdoor enclosure, one that's secure. Obviously, I'm sure you saw that Asian water monitor in the news.
That news story, yep, it's
It's
making the
so bad.
rounds, unfortunately. Yeah.
It's so bad. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's Florida for you.
yeah, and I went to war in the comments when I saw that news story come out, because it probably is somebody's pet, and I cannot imagine that if you kept a water monitor, it looked pretty healthy. I mean, it looked like it was in pretty good condition. I could not imagine somebody getting their animal to that point and then just setting it loose. They could definitely have sold that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure the media would spin that story in a heartbeat if they didn't already.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see how long those are legal for. Speaking of Florida, what made you decide to come to Florida over, and leaving Colorado and everything, especially with the sort of hostile nature of snake keeping here?
Yeah, right. It was not a snake motivated move, that was for sure. But they're coming along for the ride. So for us, we were ready to make a move. We never planned on staying in Colorado, but when the time came and decided, we were getting ready to make a move, I wanted to move back to Wisconsin, but my wife did not. So we met there in college, and she wasn't a fan of the winters. The winters can be a little brutal. Um, so we couldn't agree on that, but we could agree on Florida. We decided, it was a totally, different and new adventure for us. I have some family down here, so we had a little bit of a support network, not here on the Gulf Coast where we are, but not too far away. So we could agree on Florida. So Florida it was.
Right on. Did you have to get rid of anything that you were keeping?
Um, no, we everything made the trip. You know, It was a heck of an ordeal moving that many animals, 2,000 miles across the country. And we had to do it in the summer time because at the time my wife was a teacher. So that was the window when we had to make the move. So it was an experience.
What was that like? What was the process? I mean, did you just disassemble as many cages and racks and everything and just fill up a moving truck? And how did you bag the animals? Or that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, to be honest. It was probably a good week straight of, 15, maybe 20-hour days, of prep, and then packing the truck, driving, and then yeah, it was a unique situation where my wife and kids moved down here ahead of time because she had to be ready for school, and we were still tying up some loose ends, selling the house in Colorado. So I stayed behind. So she and the kids moved down first, kind of, got some things in the house. We had, moving truck with all this stuff from the house for the most part down here. And then, so I stayed back and moved all the animals myself and with one buddy. And to do that in the middle of summer, in the Florida heat, I actually had to rent a 26-foot reefer truck just to fit all the animals and have it be climate controlled where I could get them down here safely. And, because you can't move animals like that down in this part of the country at that time of year in a non-climate controlled vehicle, or, it would have been way too dangerous. So we had to do that. The only kicker was with the reefer truck, at least the companies that I looked into, you can't rent them one way. So I had to drive the damn thing back to Colorado after I moved everything down here, and then fly back to Florida after that.
What a nightmare.
It was a lot of work. Like I said, it was a good 7 days straight, a couple days packing the truck. Me and my buddy, we basically sleeper teamed it, drove everything down here. One guy driving, one guy sleeping. We drove straight through, unpacked the animals, got them set up, got everything plugged in, got water in there, made sure everything was okay. And then my buddy was supposed to help me drive the truck back. Well, during this whole process, he was looking for a new job and ended up landing an interview, I believe, in Arkansas. So he had to duck out. So I ended up driving the whole truck back by myself as well. And then get back, fly back here. And then by the time I get back here, I do all my own rodents as well. So of course I had to catch up on that. And felt like I probably crashed for a day or two once that whole ordeal was finished.
I can't imagine. That's a good friend you have.
Yeah. Oh, God bless him. Yeah, he busted his butt, because when we undertook something like that, I did underestimate the amount of time and effort it would take to load that truck. It was a good day and a half or 2 days straight of loading the truck, get everything situated, packing it in there real nice. We shrink wrapped all the racks, try to prevent as much, stuff shuffling around and moving, bouncing in the back of a truck like that for 2,000 miles. So it was a lot. And then unpacking it all. So we don't have any plans to move anytime in the near future.
I bet. Maybe when you get out of snakes.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to. And then since we moved down here, I've added quite a bit more caging, more racks. I'd probably need 2 of those trucks now.
Wow. That truck, was it just cages and animals, or was it everything that was in your house too?
That was just the animals. Everything in.
Wow.
So we had, yeah, you don't realize, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but the footprint you leave until you go to move, especially when you have, down here, you don't have to worry about it, but most of the other parts of the country, you have a basement. And a lot of times those basements just accumulate stuff. And it's not until you go to move and consolidate and decide what's not going to make the cut, how much of a footprint you've actually left on this earth.
Yeah.
So we had, one full-size moving truck with just household stuff. And then we had the truck that me and my buddy drove down here was strictly animals, cages, and the rodents.
Wow. Did you leave the animals in their cages, or how did they get, were they bagged up or in bins, or?
For the most part, we were able to just leave them in the cages and just pack them in there really tight. Some did have to be cupped or bagged depending on, what their setup was, but, just removed, anything that could bounce around or tip in the cage, so it's just the animal in there, throw some packing material in there, and that's how we did it.
How's it been producing animals in Florida versus Colorado?
It took a while for the animals to acclimate, not health wise. I didn't have any health problems, but I think just establishing their new cycles, it took, I felt like with the amount of animals I had and was trying and the production I got the first couple of years was very low. So I think it really took them quite a while to acclimate from Colorado, which is we were at about 6,500 feet. So for one, you have the elevation. For two, it's a very arid climate. Moving down here to the flatlands at sea level, subtropical climate, all kinds of heat and humidity. In Colorado, you're basically trying to add as much moisture to the air as possible, not really worrying about that end of it. Down here, it's the opposite, where your air conditioner is constantly sucking the moisture out of the air to keep the building as cool as possible. Mm-hmm. So it took a while. It seems like this year is finally a year where the animals are, I'm getting the amount of production I would have hoped, so this is almost 4 seasons later.
Wow. What kind of colubrids?
There's some other variables and factors in there that probably contribute as well. A lot of my animals were older in Colorado, getting kind of that age, and I ended up losing, some just to older age, and then I had a lot of other stuff that I had held back and was raising up, and that wasn't quite ready. So there were probably a number of different variables involved, but now we're finally, I think, at the point where everybody's settled in. They seem to have their cycles, and seen a lot more production this year.
How do you get your temperatures to drop down here dramatically during the winter to kind of signal that it is winter?
I think where we are, we're just a little south of you. It gets cool enough for most of the animals where, if you just allow the temperatures to fall naturally, if the nighttime lows are in the 50s, I think that gives them enough of a drop even inside to do what they need to do. So I don't really manipulate much unless it's for the colder weather animals where I need to get them below the upper 60s at night, or for more time than that. But most of the stuff we just kind of allow it to cycle naturally and try not to fight that as much as you can.
Are you turning your heat off during the winter? Like for the cages, yeah. I mean.
Oh, yeah. So at night, for the carpets, I don't give them nighttime heat really ever. They get a natural drop. And that just will happen to naturally be lower during the winter months when the ambient is lower at night. So, during the season, the warmer seasons, they're still getting down to, maybe 76 or so at night. During the winter months, that might be low 70s, upper 60s, just depending on how cold that night gets.
Do you move anything outside during the winter, like centralians or anything?
Yeah, you can do it different ways. I think with them, low 70s, upper 60s may not be enough to get them to cycle and produce. So however you want to do it, I've tried moving them outside. I've tried um, basically, pumping that cold air into an area from outside to inside. However you want to do that. I think there's enough of a cold drop in the winter months where you don't have to force things too much, as long as you figure out how you want to harness those outside temperatures and expose the animals to them.
Do the jungles need a more dramatic temperature drop, or is it less dramatic for them because they're more tropical?
I treat pretty much all the carpets the same as far as temperatures. The one exception being the Brettles during the winter. They get colder. But the jungles, the Papuans, all my northern coastals, the inlands get a little bit cooler. I just, tend to keep them a little bit lower and closer to the floor. But really the Brettles are the only things that I try to get lower at night compared to the rest of them.
Do you keep diamonds?
Oh yeah, I should say diamonds as well. Yeah, so diamonds are the other clear exception there. So yeah, they get, I'd say, even more of a drop than the Brettles. So I get them down here. It doesn't get too cold where you really need to worry about the bottom, and how low they're going to get. That's what's kind of nice, is you don't need to try to play, keeping them within a certain range. You could just try to get them as low as the temps down here are going to let you. So them, yeah, I do similar to a lot of people when you hear them talk about diamonds, where, during the winter months, I get them as cold as possible at night, which down here tends to be into the 50s. They might get upper 40s some nights on the really cool nights, but then they warm back up during the day.
Yeah, this last winter was a weird one. It was hot and wet.
Yeah, and now it's just hot and dry, right? Really hot.
Jeez, it's so crazy. It's so crazy how hot it is.
Yeah.
I'm concerned, like we're only in May and it's already almost 100 degrees outside with the humidity and yet no rain, so it's just like a tinderbox out there.
Well, you're a Florida native, right?
Yeah.
So in your time, here, do you usually get more of a spring? Is you usually kind of more of the in-between season, between what we call winter down here and then just the hot long summer?
Yeah, I would say nothing has made sense since 2011. That's when everything started getting really hot, I feel, in the winters. And then in the spring it would get really dry and hot. And then out of nowhere you'd get this huge influx of rain and the storms and all that. But it's been getting hotter and hotter every winter. That's been the biggest thing I've noticed. I remember being a kid, we would often have days where there'd be frost out on the lawn and the roofs and everything, multiple days, and Christmas would be cold. And now it feels like Christmas is in the 80s usually. Most of the time it's in the upper 70s, mid 80s. And it's just been getting hotter and hotter.
Yeah, see, this is only our fourth spring and summer down here, but I want to say that we had at least a little bit more of a spring, a little bit more of a lead into the summer compared to this year. It seemed like this year we just went from the winter months where, maybe the daytime highs are 60s and 70s straight into the 90s.
Yeah. And it was a weird winter too, because how wet it was. The amount of rain was bizarre. And then for it to stop now in the spring, none of it makes any sense.
And again, we've only been down here, our fourth spring and summer, but I seem to remember the rains starting earlier. I've never seen our grass as brown and crunchy as it is in May and June. Seems like, February into March were kind of like the drier months, but then come April, it seems like the saying goes, I seem to remember more showers in April starting then. Not this year.
Yeah, it's concerning because I keep hearing people are really worried about this hurricane season, that we're gonna get it all at once. The Gulf is very, very hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. We've only had one hurricane, and our first one was a doozy with Ian. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But guess
How
we'll
much
find
damage
out.
did you guys take?
Not much. We lost a bunch of lanai screens. We had some landscaping damage. I had one big tree that was partially uprooted. We didn't have any water in the house. I got the shutters up. We don't have impact glass windows and doors, so I put up all the shutters, and they did their job. And thank God it was not nearly as bad as a lot of folks down here experienced. How about you guys?
About the same. Yeah, we got really lucky. I don't know why, but we lost one shingle off our roof, and most people lost most everything. It was a lot of tarps. I flew out of Fort Myers, I think 2 years ago, going to Texas, and I remember coming back to the airport. It was just blue tarps as far as you could see around the
Yep.
airport. Absolutely bizarre.
Yep.
How long were you guys without power?
About 4.5 days.
Oh, wow. That's not too bad.
How about you guys? Yeah.
I want to say it was a week, and we're on a well, so we had no water either. So we have a bunch of emergency water storage containers, and we had to use those. And then the heat and the flooding too, because our levee system in my city broke. And the 2 days after the storm, all of a sudden you see flooding in the street, and you're like, what is going on here? And some levees had broken. And yeah, I remember seeing a sign that said, turn around, don't drown. And I'm like, geez, this is so crazy. It was so crazy, barbecuing, and, we had the generator running and all that. It was bananas. It was not a fun time. And I work for the government. Okay. So I was, activated and doing my stuff on that end. So, you had to report the day after the storm. And my job is, on a good day, 45, 50 minutes from my house. So then with all the flooding and everything, it was crazy doing 12-hour shifts and all that.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah, that was the one thing I was really nervous about moving down to Florida. We thought maybe we're far enough inland where it won't be, quite the same amount of impact as maybe folks on the coast. But I guess when you have a storm like that roll through, like, the whole state gets pounded.
Yeah. You guys got it the worst down where you're at.
It seemed like it was a little, it was coming right towards Fort Myers. And then at the last minute, it kind of turned a little further north, I think. So I think it was, I want to say, the county or two just to the north of us. Seems like they got pounded really bad and or at least had power outages for significantly longer than what we had. I talked to people who were out for a lot longer than a week, so 4.5 days was inconvenient, but in the grand scheme of things, could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
And luckily it wasn't too hot after, right after the storm. It seemed to stay kind of in the low 80s. And it wasn't terribly humid. So as long as you had, some kind of generator, you could at least keep the air moving.
Yeah, we had we have a drainage easement behind our house, and that filled all the way up to our backyard and then receded. And so we had the windows open, and it was just this stench of just swamp water coming in the house. It was so nasty, like, and yeah, the day after the storm, it was beautiful out. I couldn't believe it. It was so beautiful and breezy and cool and dry. And then, yeah, as we got further towards that 7-day mark, the temperature rose, that swamp smell coming in the house. It wasn't fun anymore, doing the pioneer life.
We had a similar situation where our property, I guess no properties sit very high down here in Florida. We're all basically sea level, maybe a few feet above. But
yeah,
part of our property has a wetland conservation area. So when we do get, even during a normal rainy season down here, we basically have a moat around the property.
wow.
So when that came through, it was literally a moat around pretty much everywhere, because that low conservation, that wetland area. But like I said, luckily it didn't come into the house. Even with that storm surge, I remember hearing everybody on the news talk about, like, okay, just prepare yourselves, because the next day or two, water levels are going to rise. And we're not that far north of the Caloosahatchee River. So a lot of people that are closer to the river, they had feet of water in their house, knee or waist high, or sometimes more.
Did you see any animals get sort of any snakes or anything get displaced during that with all that flooding?
I saw an otter swimming in our yard. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I had to blink and my brain to register what I just saw. Yeah, there was an otter swimming in our side yard.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
But no gators, nothing like that.
I was at work once watching the security cameras, and I think it was like lunchtime. It was around noon. And I see this, it looked like a ferret bouncing across the street, and then 3 or 4 little ones behind it. And it was a mama otter and her babies. And it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. Yeah. It was so cool. Yeah. I've only seen them once in my time in Florida.
Yeah, that was my only time as well.
So what do you do for your animals when the power goes out? Like, just don't feed them, or, I mean, I guess they're on ambient then, right?
Yeah, luckily the pythons they're perfectly content in the low 80s. For them it wasn't much of a problem. I have some colubrids, some temperature sensitive colubrids who don't like 80s. For them, it was pushing it, a little bit. I had to keep them, on the concrete, keep a fan on them. They weren't as happy as they normally are, but everybody was okay.
Which colubrids are those?
Those were primarily the bamboo rat snakes. So they're more of a little bit higher elevation, kind of cooler weather species, where they don't like anything really 80 or up. So for them, 80, low 80s is really pushing it. So them was able to keep them on the concrete. It's a little bit cooler, keep a fan on them, and they did okay.
Yeah, that would be nerve-wracking. So you keep them. So that sounds kind of similar to like a black milk snake, the higher altitude, cooler temperature.
Yep. So down here, they're your room temperature snakes. You don't need to keep any heat on them. They're perfectly content doing their thing, with the ambience that I run, around 76, 77.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So do you keep them in the same room as your other animals, or do you keep them out in a different area of the house?
Yeah, the ambients are pretty steady during the cooler months, and they don't get above 77. and that's fine. They don't seem to need, they do fine without a gradient. In Colorado, I ran them with a little bit of heat, but again, heat basically was the ambient that we run down here. They would have a little bit cooler area, but since I've been here, they do great. They produce every year. They're rocking and rolling 76, 77. It's just during the winter months that I cool them.
What all do you keep for colubrids aside from them?
Aside from those guys, I have some rhino rats, the black milks. I have some other milk and king snakes, and I think that's about it.
You have black milks?
Mostly North American. No, not a lot. I work with some Sinaloan milks.
Okay.
The black milks, and then I have some other king snakes, some cow kings, some speckled kings, and some Mexican black kings. Oh, and some mountain kings. I have a handful of those guys too.
You have more than you can remember.
I got to look over there. I was like, what am I missing? I'm missing something. Yeah, the mountain kings as well.
I didn't know you had black milks. That might be bad for me because they've been on my list. I love that snake. I love the way that you care for them. They're easy to care for. I love how big they get.
Mm-hmm.
The color transformation is cool. There's so much to love about them.
Yeah, I mean, they're about as close as you can get to an indigo down here in Florida, since we can't keep those, but they're great. Yeah, they give you a lot to like, for sure.
What do you keep them in an adult?
Right now, I come in one of these, a ARS 8500 series tub. So about a 3 foot by 2 foot. A bunch of cypress mulch in there. They like to get under there, and burrow and hide.
Yeah. Do you have eggs?
No, I only have one pair, and they are 5 years old this year. So age-wise, they should be ready, but I don't know. We'll see. I do have them paired up, so I guess we'll find out here probably in the next couple of months if it'll take. I have seen some activity, definitely some interest. So we'll see. I've never tried them before, so I'm figuring it out.
All right, my fingers are crossed.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, I've been thinking about them. Now with them, usually the males are larger than the females. Is that accurate?
Mine are about the same,
Yeah.
and I think I got them mixed up, honestly, the other week. I had to figure out again which one was the male, and then borrowed some of my wife's blue fingernail polish so as not to confuse them again. But mine are about the same.
Right on. How big are they at 5?
They're maybe about the girth of a brat, maybe a little bit bigger. And I'd say lengthwise, maybe 4.5, probably not quite 5 feet.
I love that snake. I don't know what it is about them. I don't know. I've thought about getting the I don't know. Maybe it's the temperature, that they don't need heat, and I just think it's really cool too. I like the background of an animal, and where they came from and just the environment that they came from. You look at it on Google and you research where they came from, and it's so appealing, that they're at this really high altitude up in these cloud forests, with the clouds that are always rolling through, and it's always this cool temperature, and it's just really appealing. There's a lot that you could do there if you kept them as a display snake, you could go bioactive with them and plant it out with a fogger and do all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah, they're a great pet too. they're not twitchy and spazzy, compared to a lot of milk snakes.
Yeah.
They're obviously, bigger, more robust. You mentioned the color change is really drastic. Those big black iridescent scales. Very easy to work with, low maintenance. There's a lot to like, for sure.
Yeah. Now I'm really excited. So I hope they produce this year for you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. We'll see.
They are cool. I don't know. I don't keep any colubrids, but whenever I think about getting one, that's the only one. They're just the size, everything about them is so cool. What drew you to the rhino rats? They're pretty cool too. I don't think I'd ever keep them, but they are pretty neat.
They're, it's funny. I was doing a presentation in a school just the other week, and it's like all the kids, it's like, what's not to like about a green snake with a horn on its head?
Yeah.
How cool is that? No, but they're what drew me to them was when I initially started adding colubrids. I added Asian colubrids first, so I got some bamboo rat snakes and then the rhino rats. They seem to be pretty simple to care for. You can meet their needs and set them up and take care of them a number of different ways. They're hardy. They go through a drastic color change. Appearance, is very unique. They're a slender, athletic snake. Again with the horn and they're, in my experience, they're very simple and hardy. The only tough part is kind of getting them over that hump as babies, because at least the animals that I've produced, they don't naturally go for rodents. They don't want a pinky mouse. I haven't had any luck. I really tried this year to do that. I tried all the different tricks I'm aware of, to get them to do that without switching them from minnows to pinks. And after 3 months, I gave up. I just went back. Going for minnows in the water bowl, it's just a natural feeding response for them. They just gobble them up. So that's the only trick. I'd say the only challenge with them is getting them started as babies.
That actually sounds like it would be pretty cool to keep them in like a semi-aquatic, like big exoterra or something like that with fish in there. That would be pretty neat to observe that behavior.
They're excellent display animals. I had a pair cohabbed for a while in a spare green tree python cage. So it was like a 3 foot by 2 foot. And I put a bunch of ledges and arboreal hides in there, and they had perches, and they used all of it. And they were always out perched. They love sitting on ledges. Very alert, always following whatever's going on in the room. And yeah, I mean, and you, like you said, you could probably set them up and do bioactive. I've never tried that myself, but you can do them like that. Now I have them more of a tub setup, since the green tree pythons cages are all housing green tree pythons. I didn't have a spare one of those anymore. So I moved them back into a tub setup, and they do great that way too.
How do they do with handling? Are they more of a display animal, or do they do pretty well with handling?
Yeah, they do fine. I was joking in the classroom when I was giving that presentation. It was my son's class, and the only time I've ever seen one bite was actually one of my adults that bit my son. I've never been bitten by my adults. A couple little babies, maybe coming out of the egg, or a little defensive, but generally they don't offer. They're very alert, easy to handle. They're not going to sit still, maybe like a ball python would in your hand. They're going to be moving around and give you a lot to work with.
Sure.
Yeah, they're easily handled.
How'd your son react to the bite?
It was a surprise, he chewed on him for a little bit.
Oh, really?
I'd never
Oh,
seen it happen, so
man.
neither of us were expecting it. And then all of a sudden, you look down and he's got a bunch of little pinprick and blood coming up out of his arm, and I think it was more the shock than anything. We were both pretty surprised, but
Yeah.
that was the only
Wait,
time it's ever happened. Hasn't happened since either.
is that the only time he's been bitten? Was by a rhino rat?
Probably not, but yeah, that was probably the most recent.
I get so nervous when I let my boys near the snakes. My youngest one has zero fear. I've got an Argentine boa, and he'll just come right up to her and just go right to her head and start petting her. And I'm like, dude, you gotta, read her body language and everything. She doesn't, no fear at all. He even snakes that he sees tear me up, like a little baby carpet or something like that. He just goes right up to him and wants to hold him. My older one, though, he's a little bit more cautious, but he went and grabbed a black racer at his grandparents' house and it bit him on the arm. And he was so excited. It was like a badge of honor. He's like, look, I finally got bitten by a snake. And he's got, this perfect little mouth print from a black racer on his arm. And those suckers can be, I mean, man, they will gnaw on you if they're not feeling it.
Yeah, I've never met one of. I mean, that's a guaranteed bite. Grabbing one of those.
Yeah, they're not about it
if you can catch them.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of snakes have you run into here in Florida now that you're here?
I think I'm up to 10 or 11 species so far. So, a lot of your common animals around, your black racers, like you mentioned, your Everglades or yellow rats, a ribbon snake. I found a black swamp snake. What else have we had around here? Blind snake, ringneck snake.
You got a lot of the ringnecks. My kids are always finding those. They're flipping rocks and pulling them up.
Yeah, I found a few of those. And as far as venomous, a couple of coral snakes, cottonmouths, and I think I told you, I got one eastern diamondback so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How many cottonmouths?
Those more than any of the other venomous, so maybe a half dozen or so.
Wow. Lucky. Mm-hmm. I've never seen one.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I've never seen a living rattlesnake either.
Okay. I haven't found a pygmy yet. That's one I'm hoping to find this year for the first time. But usually cool. From what I hear, for the herpers down here, cottonmouths are pretty. I guess if you're out in the habitat, they're pretty prevalent. It's the diamondbacks and the corals that seem to be pretty hard to find.
Yeah, we had a exterminator come out to our house and do their whole contract thing, and he put out these glue traps and it caught a scarlet king. I was so depressed.
Oh no.
I was so depressed. I called him up and I'm like, we're done. You're not coming back. And I told him specifically, I was like, because he was talking about, we want to catch snakes and lizards and this and that on these glue traps. And I'm like, no, don't put any out my garage. I said, I do not want to harm any reptiles, and more of just a preventative measure. And he put these glue traps everywhere. And I don't know what the hell a scarlet king was doing in my bedroom. I kid you not. It was under my nightstand is where he put that glue trap.
Yeah, you talk about an animal that's hard to find. Of all the places you would not think to look, and you got one in your own bedroom, huh?
Yeah. I have no idea how it got in there. But yeah, no more glue traps. That was the first and last time, because that tore my heart out.
I've yet to find one of those guys yet. I did find a glass lizard 2 years ago. That was
They're
that was
so cool.
pretty neat. I had to do a double take because I was like, I just saw the head at first. I was like, that looked more like a monitor head than I was like, what? And then then I realized what it was, and that was pretty neat.
Yeah, I think I've seen probably at least 5 of those, and yeah, they're always fun, especially if you catch them on the road because they're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
They can't get any traction. They're just flip flop like a fish.
yeah,
It's like the more panic they get, the more they're not going anywhere. You know, my dog almost ate one once while we were on a walk. They
yeah.
picked the guy up and moved him out to the grass. But yeah, they're a neat find for sure. Do you
I
have
have this.
any? Oh, go ahead.
I have this. I was gonna say I have this biking trail I like to go on, and it was going to be a development originally until when they went to survey it, they found there's an awful large gopher tortoise population on it, so they ended up preserving it and and did run like a walking trail through it. So I like to go, ride the bike through there and you see gopher tortoises. So I'm hoping someday I'll stumble upon an indigo. I don't know that they're still here in this county, in this area, but from what I understand, there is a population not too far from here. So maybe that there are some random animals still cruising around here somewhere.
Yeah, that'd be an epic find. I've seen one in my life, and the size of it, I was just blown away by.
Really?
Yeah, I could not believe how, and I was a kid, so who knows what my memory is doing to that, but it was an
Mhm.
enormous animal. And
Very cool.
remembering it as a kid, I'm thinking like at least 10 feet long, but but that
At least the width of the road is stretched across the entire
yeah,
road.
yeah, it was a 20-foot animal. But when you're a
Yeah.
kid, everything is gigantic.
Right. Yep.
But
Yep.
have you run
Yeah, I
into
think other
any
than
of
that, oh
I was
no, I
going to
was just
say, have you
trying to think if I had any other species so far, and I think the only one I forgot to mention that I've found is a corn snake, of course.
yeah.
Yep.
What about invasives?
Um, of course, you're littered with the common brown anoles and Cuban tree frogs and things like that.
Yeah.
The racers and the rat snakes seem to love to eat those, but hogs. I haven't found a berm. Um, haven't found any of the. We don't really have iguanas by us here. They seem to be further kind of towards Fort Myers, Cape Coral. I haven't found any out by us yet. Um, no berms, no water monitors or whatever you have walking around up, by where you are.
Yeah. The Mexican spiny tail iguanas are pretty pretty common in my area. If you got out towards the beach, they're all over the place.
Okay.
They're pretty interesting.
When we go visit our family there and on the Atlantic side, the green iguanas over there, I mean, they're just all over the place. Can't believe how many there are.
Yeah. Are they further south or more up north?
They're basically due east, kind of Palm Beach area,
Okay.
West Palm Beach, Jupiter, in that area.
Okay.
Hmm.
I wonder if you could find berms there, or if it gets too cool during the winter.
Yeah, couldn't tell you. I've
I mean,
only
with
went
this,
out on a couple
go ahead.
trips, trying to find a berm, and it would have been a shot in the dark, but haven't had any luck yet.
Yeah, I want to get out this summer. It'd be fun to find one crossing the road or something.
Hmm.
All right. what do you think about doing a care sheet or a care guide for carpet pythons?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
All right. So look at this sort of from the perspective that this is a keeper that is keeping a pet and as a display animal. So
Mhm.
no bins, but I'll, you know, as an adult animal,
Mhm.
as a baby, you're probably going to want to keep a carpet python in something smaller and more secure, right?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, so in your experience, do they make a good pet, carpet pythons, or are they more of a display animal?
They're both. They're great pets. They're hardy. I think they're forgiving of some husbandry issues. They You don't have to be as dialed in maybe with some other species as far as the temperatures they will tolerate. They definitely have their range, but I think that range is maybe a little bit bigger and more forgiving. Um, they're but at the same time, as a display animal, I mean, they're semi-arboreal. A lot of times you'll see them out and about. They'll perch, they'll climb. They obviously, I mean, come in any flavor, pattern, color you could think of. So I think they can give you a lot of both of those as far as being a great pet and a great display animal.
Which one out of all the carpet pythons, which one do you think makes the best pet, or do you think that they're all about equal?
Once you get to the adult size, they're they're all fairly similar. I think if anything, it's going to be individual personality, and I don't think there might be some trends when you look at subspecies or species, but once you get to the adult stage, I think they're all fairly similar. Some of them, I think, will be more likely to start out not as defensive as babies. Maybe
Hmm.
your Brettles, in my experience, the Papuan carpets, compared to Darwins or jungles or coastals, which in my experience tend to start out more defensive as babies. But yeah, once you get to that adult stage, I think they're all fairly similar as far as temperament.
How about the inlands? How's their personality when they're babies? Are they pretty defensive?
I hear a lot of people talk about how they're much more placid or easy to work with, less willing to strike. Mine seem pretty similar. They defensive as babies. Um, and but once you get them in hand, they're fine.
Right on. Now, is
Mm-hmm.
that aggressive, sort of? I guess it's. I don't know how to phrase that, but it's they have a bad rap, for being pretty aggressive snakes. Do you attribute that just to the juvenile animals and that's something that they grow out of?
For the most part, I think, like we were talking about, I think it's a survival mechanism. When you're that small and um, likely to be predated upon by a number of different things, like you you probably need to have that mechanism built in to give you the best chance to survive. So as long as you take that into account, understand that. But then once they get bigger, with age, with size, they tend to not be like that as maybe their first reaction. Now, that can sometimes be confused with, I think, feeding response. When you go into a cage or a tub to take an animal out, depending on how, what your routine is and what they experience, a lot of times that is associated with feeding. So they may be thinking food first, which may mean strike or what some people may interpret as aggressiveness. It's generally not. Now,
Hmm.
some animals that feeding response can be harder to turn off than others. But generally, once you do that, and you have the animal out and realize they're not being fed, especially for a larger animal, for the most part, generally speaking, and there are rules to the exceptions to the rule, I should say, they're pretty easy to work with for the most part.
How do you turn off that feed response if you were dealing with a new keeper that's interested in getting a carpet python?
Yeah, what you can do is, just use a hook to, to take them out. If they have that warm hand coming into their cage to grab them, they may associate that with feeding, as if it were a food item, or possibly a predator. So if you take them out with a hook, for example, that doesn't have a heat signature, I think that's a great way to get them out and then bring them into your hand from the hook.
Right on. Do you recommend a substrate or paper towels, or any form of paper, I should say? Like what would you recommend to a new keeper?
I prefer paper. That's what works best for me. I think it's sanitary. It's easy to notice when there is a mess that needs to be cleaned. It's easy to roll up, get it out, wipe it down, new paper in. Other folks prefer substrate, and that can work just fine too. For me, I don't know. I don't like substrate as much. I think it's a little bit of unnecessary risk. Like, I tend to use cypress when I use substrate for the colubrids, and if that were to be ingested, most times it'll be passed. But if you were to get a sharp or thicker piece, wedged in the throat, that is a risk that can easily be avoided by using paper. Down here in Florida, you don't have to worry about humidity. A lot of folks will use substrate to try to help increase humidity, which in my experience, you also don't really need to do for carpets. For me, they did just fine in Colorado with very low humidity, down into the 20, 30%, no problem at all. No problem shedding. So I didn't have a need for it there, and I don't have a need for it here in Florida either. But it's preference, it can work both ways.
How do you feel about the whole bioactive thing?
I don't have any experience with it, so I can't speak to it firsthand at all. I don't think it's going to work for a bigger python as well. I mean, at least you can't rely upon that to do all the work for you. Sure. You're still going to have to stock clean. So in my mind, for me personally, when I'm working with a good sized collection, it comes down to efficiency and effectiveness. How can I make sure everybody's got great husbandry and allow me to, not be slacking and to get through everybody in a very timely manner. And for me, that's paper. There's no way I'd be able to do that with bioactive.
Yeah. So if you're just a person keeping, one snake, in this case, a carpet python, you have more time, then maybe it's it's a whole different ball of wax, right?
Yeah, certainly. If you just have one or a couple, you could definitely do that. But I would guess, again, I don't have any personal experience from it, but I would assume just from the amount of waste that you'll get from an adult animal, that bioactive is not going to take care of that entire pile of poop. You're going to still have to do some spot cleaning.
Yeah, 100%. Do you prefer ambient or gradient keeping?
Gradient, for sure. I'll do a warm end, or a basking site, and then a cool end, so that they can choose, and then nighttime drops year round.
What are your temps? What do you recommend? What's your hot spot and what's your cool end?
Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, I'll shoot for a warm area about 85 or so. The cool area of the cage will be, during the day, somewhere around 80, maybe upper 70s. And then at night, I don't offer any heat. They just drop down to ambient, which for me, runs about 76 or 77.
That's a 85. It's so crazy because I remember keeping, 10 years ago, before I had gotten out of the hobby. Now I'm back in it and everything is cooler. It's more individualized. So with 85, do you notice that they really use that basking spot a lot? That they get on it and absorb that, or do they still kind of keep away from it?
Well, that's part of the reason I don't even go above 85 is because they don't even sit on that all day long when it's offered. If they have 12 hours of heat offered to them at only 85 and they don't use all of that, that tells me that it doesn't need to be any higher than that. But carpets, like we were talking about, I think they give you a range you can work within. So if you have a basking area, even as low as, low to mid 80s or even as high as 90, I think as long as you offer them a gradient, in a way to get away from that heat, I think you'll be just fine.
Yeah. So how do you verify your temperatures?
Temp gun, you can use a temperature gun. The one that I use has a laser on it, so you can point and shoot, and that'll tell you exactly what that surface temperature is. And then, like we were talking about too, observe the animal, and try to read what they're telling you. If they're sitting on that heat all the time or they're never on it, and just try to figure out what they're telling you.
What do you think about temperature cycling for an animal that you don't plan to breed? Do you think that there's benefit to that? That it's a natural part of their existence that should be included, or do you think that just whatever's going on in your environment is enough? Because like we talked about before, if it's wintertime, your house is going to be cooler, and then it's going to be warmer in the summer. Do you think that there's a benefit to leaning into that, even if you're not going to breed?
In my opinion, yes. I think these animals, for the most part, especially the further away from the equator you get, experience seasons. We all experience seasons. So I think as best as you are able to recreate that in captivity for them, I think it's good. The more heat, the higher the heat, and the more often the heat is offered, I think that's part of the problem folks used to have back in the day with diamond pythons and maybe with some other animals, is if you're giving too much heat too often and not an opportunity to get away from it, what you're doing is you're speeding up the metabolic life of that animal, and maybe aging it prematurely. So personally, I think seasonality and temperature drops is a good way to go, regardless of, if you're breeding or not. And they can certainly handle it,
Yeah. So when you're doing that that sort of temperature cycle, you're also reducing the amount that you feed.
Yep. You need to make sure you take that into account. You don't want to just be dropping temperatures and continue to feed like you could, because, that animal, the way it works, it needs to have that heat to be able to digest the meal and carry out all of its functions. So you have to do both. You can't just do one. That might result in problems.
Yeah. So if you're throwing a rat at it and keeping it in the low to mid 70s, that's going to lead to some issues.
Or at least if you're going to continue to feed while you're dropping temperatures, make sure the animal has the opportunity to warm up during the day. And you might also consider reducing the size of the meal that's being offered, so the animal can, digest it easier if it doesn't have access to as much heat as it would during a warmer season.
Okay. If you do plan to breed, so let's say this individual picked up another animal, like a normal human being, and they plan to breed at some point. When do you think that you should start cycling the temperatures? So maybe if you were keeping the baby in a tub with pretty consistent, belly heat or something like that, when do you think that acclimating them to seasonal changes should start?
I'd say the sooner the better. I can explain the way I do it, and my babies up to until maybe the point where they're a yearling or so, they don't have a drop. So that's the only exception to the way I do things. But once they grow out of that baby shoebox tub size enclosure, at that point, they are experiencing nighttime drops pretty much to the same extent that the adults are. So
And
I'd say
you just totally take away
that's
heat
going to be
at night.
preference.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And then again, I think that's preference. There are some folks who do ambient, and keep their animals, babies, adults at a steady temperature and don't really, give a warm area or a cool area. They might just keep them in the low 80s, 80, 82, 24/7. And that can work for people. A lot of people, myself included, prefer the gradient strategy. I think if you're going to move from one to the other, I think one thing you just need to make sure you do is do it slowly and make sure you're watching that animal instead of shocking it. That can cause some problems. But the way I do it, is for about the first year or so, they have just 24/7 heat. It's not a lot of heat. It's similar. Maybe on the warm end about 85. The cool end will be about 80 or so. And then after about a year, when they move up a tub size, that's when I transition them to nighttime drops. And that's what they'll have for the rest of their lives with me.
And that nighttime drop is just the heat totally turns off at night.
Yep. But again, it's not getting any lower than 76, 77 during the warm seasons, and during the winters for the younger animals that aren't adults that I'm not cycling for breeding, I don't let them fall quite as low as the adults. They'll still get their nighttime drops, but in the winter, it may only be as low as low 70s. They're never going to hit. I never let the young ones or the yearlings, 2-year-olds hit upper 60s.
Is that because you're feeding more often when they're younger?
I do feed the younger ones through the winter, but it's not nearly as much, and they are smaller meals as well. So if I were feeding maybe a 2-year-old or so every couple of weeks during the winter months when they're having lower nighttime lows, I may only feed it, every 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that's for 0 to 2 about?
I'd say roughly maybe 1 to 3, somewhere in there. For the yearling stage, the baby stage, I'm feeding them consistently all seasons, every week or two. But once, you kind of out of that baby phase, at least a year old, that's when I back it off. And during the winter months, I back off the feeding even more.
Okay. What do you use to control your temperatures? Are you doing timers, dimmers, thermostats?
I use thermostats. I use herp stats for everything now, as far as pythons. I moved over from, I used to have Renko thermostats, which are rock solid, fantastic. I never had a problem with them, but they're manual, so those you can't, they're not programmable, like your herp stats and some other options that are out on the market. So for those, if you're going to use something like that, you basically have to use it with the timer if you're going to do night drops. And then you're basically it's all or nothing. There's heat or there's nothing. So personally, and now I prefer the herp stats. They seem to be great. They offer you a lot of options you can program in. You can do your nighttime drops. You can ramp up and ramp down, so it's not just heat clicking on and then full bore. You can kind of ease into it, like maybe the animals would experience in nature as the sun rises, and then the other way around in the evening.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like that's everybody's go-to now for thermostats.
Yep.
So what do you recommend for humidity, to maintain humidity to get a good shed and everything? I know we kind of already covered that previously, but do you think that they benefit from being misted while they're in shed?
For carpets, I've never worried about it, and I've never had problems. That be it Colorado with very low humidity or here in Florida with more. They seem to shed just fine. I'd say the one thing when you do see a shed, to answer your question, I wouldn't worry about misting. The one thing I would do though is, after a shed, I would check, maybe the areas that if they're going to have a problem, sometimes you may have a little bit left on the tip of the tail, or if you have an eye cap or somewhere around the head, just check the animal over and make sure there's none left on there. But generally with carpets, regardless of humidity, you're not going to have usually any problems shedding.
How would you deal with that with a retained shed on the tip of the tail or an eye cap?
You can just manually, little pressure in between your fingers and pull that off the tip of the tail, or, use a fingernail if you need to get a little bit of a start. Eye cap, same way. Carpets are pretty easy to restrain. It's blood pythons or Sumatran short tail. That's a different story. They're not going to let you pin them down and pull off an eye cap, but you just use a little bit of friction, from your fingers and, maybe your thumb or something and kind of rub it. And that'll usually come off. If not, you can soak it or mist, to bump that humidity. And then if it doesn't peel it off itself, it'll be a lot easier to manually get off with your fingers.
So maybe for a newer keeper, if they notice a retained eye cap or tip of the tail or something like that, you'd recommend give it a soak first just to increase the odds of it coming off easier.
Yep. If you go in there and, there's something left on there and it doesn't come off real easy, with your fingers and a little bit of friction, you can, soak it, mist it, and then it should come off much easier.
Right on. How often do you change water?
Weekly. Yep.
Okay.
So every week they get fresh water, fresh bowl.
Right on. How do you sanitize your bowls?
I use the dishwasher. So I use heat. I don't use disposables like some folks, which can work great. So I have a dishwasher, that I use and run all the bowls through there. It's a lot of loads, but with the heat, that disinfects and seems to do the job just fine. Beats scrubbing them all. Now, if you just have a couple, you can scrub a bowl, no problem, or maybe just throw it in with your people dishes.
Yeah. So do you have like duplicate water bowls? So you throw the new one in, or do you pull them all out, clean them, and then put them all back same day?
I probably don't have quite as many to be able to do, but I do have way more than, one per animal. So I can almost, swap them out while I'm catching up on all the loads to get clean ones.
Nice. What does that take you, about a day?
For the dishwasher?
Yeah, just all those animals. I mean, you said you have how many snakes?
Yeah, it's a good 7 or 8 loads.
Wow.
So it takes multiple days.
Wow.
You need one of those. What I need is one of those, restaurant quality, like 3 or 5 minute dishwashers,
Yeah, for sure. What about What do you think about offering a bowl large enough for the animal to soak in? Do carpets soak in your opinion? Do you offer that, or do you just give them something, small enough so they have adequate water to drink?
I think, a good sized bowl that they could soak in is fine. I think I don't ever notice animals soaking, with the one exception being maybe babies. And usually that's something they grow out of fairly quickly. Um, the one other thing I would take into consideration is just making sure the bowl is large enough, because the only thing you might have trouble with is if it's too small of a bowl and easily tipped over, that might result in some cleaning or problems. But generally, in my experience, juveniles, adults don't soak in their water bowls at all.
What do you think makes the babies want to do that?
I don't know. And I've talked to other people about it too, and it's not all of them. In my experience, it's been primarily the Papuan carpets and the Darwins that I see that with. I don't see it with jungles, coastals, brettles, inlands. I've never really seen it with them. It just tends to be, for whatever reason, Papuans and the Darwins.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you feel a day-night cycle is? So, just a sun up, sun down.
Yeah, like we were talking about, that's the way I do things, and I feel it's important, to get that natural cycle. It's only natural, I think, for temperatures to drop when the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, the only thing I do different there is I don't do that with babies up to about yearling age. They just get consistent access to about 85 degrees on the warm end, but they can also cool off, relatively speaking, to about 80, maybe upper 70s on the cool end.
Okay. And what about from a lighting perspective? Giving them, do you give them ambient light? Do you give them the lighting in their cages? How important do you think that is? Obviously, like, I'm assuming you wouldn't want them to just be in a black void all the time, right?
Yeah, I don't do UV. I've never done artificial lighting. I do have artificial lights in my display cages, simply for my enjoyment. If I want to flip them on at night and check some stuff out, or I'm doing night cleaning or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the light cycle, the photo period that my animals have is all naturals. I've always had a lot of windows in every area and every room that animals are kept in, so they experience the natural photo period, that varies season to season.
Okay. Do you think that's an important trigger too for breeding?
And it certainly can't hurt. I think that, coupled with, lower temperatures, reduced feeding, I think those are some of the triggers that some of those animals need to go. So it's also, I think, easier just to not fight kind of the natural way, depending on your setup. Now, if you're in using a room or an area that doesn't have natural light, then you're going to have to manipulate that depending on what you want to offer. But for me, I've always had plenty of natural light there. I'm not going to try to black it all out and manipulate that. I like to just kind of go with the way things are, where I live, and what the animals would naturally be exposed to. And with carpets, they seem to do fine with it.
I feel like we have a pretty good day-night cycle here in Florida too. Like my wife and I were out in Colorado 2 years ago, and it was not normal how early the sun comes up. Like the sun's beaming in your room, and it's like 5:30. What's going on here? It's too early for this.
Yeah, I think the natural light cycles, are good for all of us, animals included.
Yeah. So you don't see any benefit in UVB?
I didn't say that. I've just never used it, so I don't have anything really to speak of. Going off what we've been talking about, it certainly is natural. It's something that they'll have access to in the wild. I guess they'll, some of mine get it to a lesser extent. If sun is coming in and directly, getting direct light for, maybe a small portion of the day, depending on the angle of the sun, where it's coming in a window and relative to where that cage is in the room or the area. But I've never offered it. So I can't really say.
Okay. So if for the sake of this care guide, if this individual is asking about UVB, would you recommend it or just say, no, it's, do you think
I
that there's
wouldn't.
enough data behind it?
Yeah, and I don't know. I haven't read any studies on it. I'm not aware of any studies out there on it. I would say I wouldn't recommend it because it's nothing that I have any experience with. If I were to start using it, I think what I would do is offer it for part of the day and offer the opportunity for an animal to access it, but also get away from it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you're going to have it in your cage, maybe have it on, one side, have a hide, multiple hides in there so the animal can get away from it if it doesn't want it.
All right. What's the ideal enclosure size for like an average adult carpet python?
For females, I use a 4 foot long by 2 foot deep by about 1.5 foot height display cage. Mine are all black and there's a front window. For males, it's for my smaller males or maybe a grow up female, subadult to small adult female. These tubs are great. It's about a 3 foot by 2 foot footprint with only 9 inches of height. I like to offer more height, but if I'm starting in something like this 9 inches of height does give you enough where you can mount perches in there and give them opportunity to get up off the ground. But otherwise, most of my males and smaller females are in a 3 foot by 2 foot. And again, that's about 1.5 foot of height.
Okay. So if somebody's keeping it just as a display animal, I mean, obviously you could give them a ton of space, but what do you think what would you recommend, for somebody that isn't crazy overboard and, isn't, what do you think the ideal size would be?
I like those for minimums,
Yeah.
I think 3 foot by 2 foot is fine, even for a smaller adult female.
Yeah.
4 foot by 2 foot seems fine for most females. If you get a bigger girl or maybe, like a female Brettles, you may need to go to a 6 foot or larger.
Okay.
I don't have like a like a rule of thumb for every foot of length. Excuse me. The animal is, the cage needs to have this much square footage. I don't have anything like that. I don't go by that. And animals are going to be different. Some are going to be fairly sedentary. Others are going to be much more active. So you need to be ready to tailor that to that specific animal and what it's telling you with its behavior. If it likes to move around a lot and to perch, give it more height, give it a bigger cage. If it's an animal that maybe it's a lazy animal, doesn't like to move as much, is more content sitting around, maybe it doesn't need that much space if it's not going to use it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a boa that I swear she doesn't move for probably 7 days, and then after she passes a stool, then she starts thinking about moving around. But right here, I've got a Timor in that cage, and yeah, he uses every square inch of that space. At night, he's out all over the place.
Yep.
So what do you recommend as the ideal food item for carpets? Rats, mice? Do you ever mess around with any fowl of any kind?
I generally stick to rodents. I'll start my young ones out usually on live mice. And as they get older, it'll be a combination of mice to a certain size, once they outgrow mice, rats, and I work in ASFs. Once in a while, we'll do gerbils or hamsters, just depending on what I have available. But as far as birds, I usually don't don't offer birds really for much anything, and really none to my carpets.
How do you get them off live mice? How do you make that transition?
I don't usually have too much trouble with it. I like to start with live. It's more simple. It's less work harvesting the animal. I think it elicits that natural feeding response for most of them. And by the time they're established, and generally I don't have any problem transitioning from a live food item to a warmed, thawed, or a pre-killed item. Carpets have a strong feeding response. I've had very few animals that I've ever had any trouble with. The only trouble you'll sometimes hear about will be, switching an animal over to rats. But even that, I really don't have much trouble with either. That might be, at least in part, a product of overfeeding. But usually, once you get them rolling, most of mine, and in my experience, will take just about whatever you offer them.
How often do you feed in the first year of life?
Every week to 2 weeks, leaning maybe more closer to 2.
Okay. So anywhere between 7 and 14.
Yep.
Right on. And then what about 1 to 2 years old?
For after that baby phase, once you hit a year old or more, I'm generally not feeding any more often than every 2 weeks.
Okay. And then 3 to 5, so on and so forth. Like, when do you really start pushing it out more and more?
For your juveniles, your subadults, what I usually do is, usually every couple of weeks or so. It'll vary. It's not necessarily every 2 weeks. Kind of depends what you have going on in life. But every 2 to 3 weeks or so, and once you hit that adult stage, 3 to 4 years old is usually when I'm doing much more seasonal, where during the feeding season, spring, summer, fall, might be every 2 to 3 weeks versus winter, which might be, depending on the animal, the size, the age, every 2 to 4 or not at all.
Okay. What are some potential health issues that you've experienced with carpets, or maybe you've heard about?
If you're doing a pretty good job, keeping them healthy, keeping the temperatures within the range that they need, fresh water and food, you're not going to have many problems. It's a very hardy animal. All of the animals I've ever kept, I've only ever had 3 respiratory infections. 2 of them, one of them, I believe, was a result of a gravid animal I had with a cleft lip that I used the nest box for, and actually had some moss in there. She got some kind of packed in her lip, and I think that's what caused hers. The other 2 were, I had one other animal get sick, I think because of, I don't know, it was such a long time ago. And then I had another one get sick right after that, so it might have been related. So I've had 3 total in all of my years. I haven't had one in probably 7 or 8 years. So that really shouldn't be much of a concern. I'd say that the biggest problem that I see is tumors and cancer. Carpets, I don't have nearly as large of a group of any other species, with the exception being blood, Sumatras, and balls. But carpets, of all of those, are really the only species, of those 4 that I've seen tumors and cancer in. So that's something,
What do you think's causing that?
for. Yeah, and I don't have a good answer for that. If I knew, it wouldn't be happening. I don't know. I've seen it with older animals. I've seen it there seems to be somewhat of a correlation. And again, it's a pretty small sample size to speak of from, but with younger males, shortly after becoming sexually mature, yeah, I don't know. So that's one thing, that may happen. But other than that,
Now I'm scared.
no, I mean, it's not that prevalent, but and the larger your collection is, the more things you're going to see, the more likely it is something like that is going to happen to an animal. But other than those things, I generally haven't really seen any other health problems.
How do you handle the cancer? What's the most humane thing to do when you notice a tumor or growth?
Yeah, I guess that's a bit of a controversial question or answer. I don't know. I guess that depends on, how you see things. You can let it right out, and let the animal live as long as it can, or you could have a surgery, a very most likely expensive surgery that isn't guaranteed to solve the problem long term. It can definitely come back. I know that's happened.
Yeah.
Or you can put the animal down. You got to make the call, based on your opinion, and on that of your vet.
Yeah. Yeah, I
It's case by
guess.
case.
Yeah, it feels like letting it ride out is probably the most inhumane thing. And then surgery, like you said, you could have the surgery and then just have it come back, or, it never even got it to begin with.
It's the same with people, some people prefer to not have treatment. Others would opt for an operation. Some may even go for, for the other option we talked about. Just kind of depends.
Yeah.
It's case by case. There's not a great answer. I think you make your decision based on how you feel about it, and definitely consult a veterinarian, to get a professional opinion who can maybe assess it a little bit better than just, us as a keeper.
Yeah, for sure. So you said that you generally see that mostly, or you've seen it mostly in males after hitting sexual maturity?
The only two situations I can think of where I see it as an older animal, so maybe 8, 9 years plus. The only younger animals I've ever seen it in, and again, this isn't a large sample size to speak from, has been a younger, so like just sexually mature male, maybe 4 to 6 years, somewhere in there. I've never seen it with a younger female.
All right. And do you think that food cycling, do you think that may help with that, with maybe reduce the risk? Or is it just
I
a shot in
really
the dark?
don't know. Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple ideas kicking around, but I mean, it's no different than, what we think could cause cancer in humans,
Yeah.
It's really anyone's guess.
Well, that's all depressing. I regret asking that question.
No, and it's no different than working with any type of life. There are going to be health problems at some point.
Yeah.
And the larger collection you have, the more things you're going to experience and you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make it sound like it happens all the time, because it certainly doesn't.
Yeah.
You only have a couple of animals or one. I mean, the likelihood that would happen is very low, but it goes up when you have many animals.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got hundreds, right? And I'm sure you've sold hundreds of babies. Do people stay in contact with you? Do they tell you like, hey, this animal got sick or whatever?
Some do. I can't think of any. I haven't been breeding for that terribly long either. So I mean, the oldest animal that I've produced and sold at this point would only be 10 or 11.
Okay.
Most people Yeah, I may get a picture, an update here and there from people, maybe for the first few years, but after that, unless it's someone I'm in contact with, or have become friends with or something, I don't often hear updates after that. I can't think of an. I do. Well, there was one person in Colorado who let me know there was an animal she bought that ended up having cancer, like we were just talking about. She opted to do an operation to remove it, but then it came back, and they ended up having to put the animal down in the end. But yeah, I don't get nearly as many updates or pictures or or follow up contact as I like sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you're going to hear all about the girl that I got from you.
Right on, man. Yeah, I saw that post you put up of her handling her, working on her a little bit.
Yeah.
Seemed like,
Thinking about biting me. It was hilarious.
it seemed like she didn't even want to, but it was just like, I don't know, he's holding me, so maybe I still should. It was weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the most bizarre behavior I've ever seen from her, because normally it's either she's biting and very nervous, or she goes, or she's curious and exploring and doesn't care about anything. And for some reason that day, anytime I'd move my hand, she'd just open up full gape and just come over like, I will do this, just like threatening me, but not actually following up. And now it's ironic, ever since then, she hasn't been biting anymore, and she's still, she does that kind of fake out that they do, where when you touch their body, they like, come over to you real quick and almost headbutt. But yeah, she's chilled out a lot. She was a firecracker when those first 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, I remember I had her out. I think I was changing her water, and I just took her out, and I walked by, and my wife goes walking by, and she struck at my wife so hard that she flew out of my hand, and luckily my Spider-Man reflexes kicked in, and I caught her mid-fall. But yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, seems like she's
speaking
coming around and starting to turn the corner for you.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of that, with handling, what do you recommend for handling? Do you, with babies and everything, do you notice that they get really stressed out by it? How often do you, so if somebody gets a baby from you, let's say it's less than a year old, and how long should they let it settle? And then how often should they handle for that, up to a year old?
Generally what I like to do, when you get an animal in, is just to let it settle, for a week or so, just kind of leave it be, make sure, it has water, allow it to get used to its new enclosure, to its environment, to the stimuli going on around it. After a week or so, usually what I do and recommend is, at that point, offer it a meal. And then after that, hopefully it takes, and let it sit again, for another few days or a week. And I say at that point, you can start handling. It depends on the animal, one thing for baby carpets, like we were talking about before, they can be defensive. That's their survival mechanism. If you're not okay getting the nip here and there from a little baby carpet python, maybe it's not a great fit, but they're not terrible bites. They're not going to bite and wrap and tear your finger off. You might get some little pin pricks and draw a little bit of blood, but as far as handling, one thing, I guess one little strategy you can use would be a hook. If you want to do that to take them out, that will help them get used to, coming in and out of their enclosure, but not with a hot hand. You can, one other reason I like to use paper, and this is more handy, I think, when it comes to bloods and things like that, is it allows you to kind of slide the animal and scoop it. I think if you act, I forget where I heard this, but I remember hearing somebody say, if you act more like like a branch than a hand. It helps the animal feel a little more comfortable. So if you're not grabbing it, and gripping it, maybe just allowing your fingers to act like a branch or a bush and something for it to sit on and grip.
Yeah.
That can help a little bit if it's a real defensive animal likely to strike. But like we were talking about, with age, time, size, generally they're going to grow out of that.
Right on. Do you think that an adult carpet python that somebody maybe wants to rehome or something would be a better option for a newer keeper? Somebody that's less into being bitten?
Maybe, but that could also present some other things you need to consider. An animal that's an adult is very used to where it's been, and if it's been there and kept that way for a long time, you got to consider, the transition, and it can take a lot longer to transition to you versus a baby, which you get, and mostly all it's known is you, and then you can kind of mold it, and it kind of grows up and is familiar with the way you're keeping it and working with it.
It is pretty wild, right? They do seem to get to know you as an individual, like their personalities really, really change. Have you noticed that where they kind of know you, and or do you think I'm just putting too much of my human thought into the snakes?
No, I mean, you're not overly anthropomorphizing it. I think each animal is unique and individual, and some are even unique and individual depending on the different times of the year. I have some animals who most of the time are just fine to work with, and then other times of the year they are so food crazy, it's hard to turn off that feeding response, because maybe they're trying to build follicles and they just want that food, or maybe it's a male for whatever reason, and that's all he thinks about, and all he wants at that time. Every animal is unique, so we're talking in generalities here, and you can't take that as gospel for everything.
Sure.
You just, with time and experience, observe the animals, watch it, learn its habits, and figure out what it's telling you, because the behavior that it has, that those are going to be your only indicators of what that animal needs and how to give it what it needs.
Right on. All right. Well, that's the care guide for carpet pythons. I appreciate that.
I think, a really big thing that I didn't really have is, if you do have the opportunity to find a mentor, especially hands-on in person, take someone up on the opportunity, seek somebody out. And because if you can gain a lot of experience from someone who's done it and have them show you things hands-on, I think that type of experience is very worthwhile. It was something that I wish I would have had. I was lucky to have a couple of people I consider mentors, but it was never in person. It was just over the phone. Mm-hmm.
Right on. I'll hit you up and see if I can come out to your house and scoop poop in exchange for knowledge.
Well, you mentioned you're working with, you have carpets. You mentioned a Timor python.
Yeah. I got a trio of Timors, 2 males and a female. I've got 1.2 jungles, and I'm working on eventually making that 2.2 after you advised me that, the benefits of doing that. I've got a random ass Papuan python carpet. I don't know. I've got one male. I don't know what I'm doing with him, but he's here.
Mm-hmm.
And a random ball python too. So maybe I'll breed her with the Papuan carpet.
Well, you're no
That's
beginner.
a joke.
You're certainly not an idiot, as the title of this podcast would suggest. No more than I am an expert, but you seem to have a fair amount of experience under your belt. But that said, you definitely never be content, and thinking you know it all, because never get to that point. There's always something more you can learn and observe and apply to the animals.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you know, the idiot thing, it's more leaning into that mindset that you don't know anything, you know, and that's the way I try to look at most of this stuff is, you know, anytime I do one of these episodes, just coming into it thinking I don't know anything, you know, and try to take in everything I possibly can. And so the green tree pythons, I meant to ask you about those before. How many of those do you have?
Currently, 8.
Okay.
So not a bunch, you know, and they, I'm currently just working with some Beox and Maroki type locality animals.
Oh man. Have they produced for you yet?
No, I've only ever, for most of my years keeping them, I've only had a couple, you know, maybe 2 or 3 at the most. It's only recently that I added a few more. And I really only ever had a sexually mature pair for like a year or two, and then ended up losing one of them. So I haven't really had many opportunities to produce, but haven't been able to get any, at least yet.
Okay. Are they wild caught or captive bred?
It's a split. You know, I have both. Some
Okay.
are wild caught, but well, you know, well acclimated. And I do have a handful of captive bred as well.
How are they with handling?
They're, you know, I really don't much. They're more, they're not the type, if you're looking for an animal and want to get something that you can take out and interact with, that's probably not a great choice. You can, and they are handleable, but I think they do great and prefer to just sit on their stick.
Yeah. Be left
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
Their tail wagging behavior, I think, is the coolest thing. I absolutely love watching videos of that. And is that just a lure? What do you think that is? To like trying to bring in a bird or something?
Yeah, the caught alluring, you know, kind of using that, wiggling that tail like a worm or something to attract, you know, an item it can grab as prey. Yeah, I see that pretty regularly. It's neat. It's fun to watch.
What do you feed your adults? Like what's the normal prey item?
I do mice, ASFs, and maybe an occasional rat, but
Okay.
mostly mice and ASFs.
Yeah, they're not too big of an animal, right?
No, they're not. You know, I don't have any that are very old. You know, I think my oldest is only 8 years old or so,
Hmm.
and she'll take. You know, I may give her an adult mouse or two, or like a small adult ASF, but that's about as large of a prey item as I'll offer. If I'm going to offer more, you know, it might be multiple items instead of a larger one.
What's the benefit of the African softers?
They're kind of like, I guess, an in-between size where, you know, they get bigger than a mouse, not as big as a big rat. So you can offer, for me, and my line of thinking is I can offer a little bit bigger item that's mature, but not old and too fatty. Versus, you know, if I'm thinking about like, if I want to offer a green tree a meal, maybe about the size of a jumbo mouse, I don't really want to feed a jumbo mouse. You know, it might be an older mouse, you know, that doesn't have as much nutrition as a younger adult animal. It might have more fat on it. So if I can offer an ASF that's maybe roughly the same size, but not as old, not as fatty, that seems like a good food item to me.
Do they breed as readily as mice and rats?
More so, in my experience. Yeah, they're pretty proficient when it comes to breeding. I guess it depends on your experience, what that's been. But in mine, they have pretty big litters, and they yeah, I have much better luck with them, than I do mice, for example.
Hmm. I have a I have a jungle that I'm having a hard time getting onto frozen thawed. So I've been thinking about breeding because I don't want to have to go out and buy a small mouse for,
Mhm.
$3 or, however much it is.
Right?
So I've been kicking that idea around. So I almost thought about even doing the African softwares. I wonder if they'd be more appealing in a frozen thawed state than mice. Have you noticed that they're better for more picky feeders or no?
When it comes to carpets, I certainly don't have any that'll refuse them.
Hmm.
You know, if you want to try, let me know. I'll hook you up.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Maybe get a little trio going out in the garage.
Yep.
Yeah, I used to keep rats, but I kept them in my house, at our other house, and the smell was horrendous. It was so nasty. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know why I subjected us to that.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to keep them in a living area personally. They're not as bad as mice as far as the smell, but they're not pleasant either.
Yeah, and you're breeding all three.
Yeah, I do those, and I do gerbils and some hamsters as
Oh
well.
wow, what are you
Not a
doing?
lot of the others. Just I like to have different, at least some on hand, just for different scents or flavors, or if I'm running low on something, then I can at least have something else to offer.
What is your what's your go to if you have something that is kind of picky? Like what is the most appealing rodent?
For baby carpets, I don't usually have any problems with mice. I don't like to start with rats. I don't like rat pinks. I really don't feed those to anything. Um, ASFs, if I'm having a picky animal, you can try ASFs, or you can try bird scent. If
Hmm.
you have a stubborn feeder, you don't necessarily have to feed a bird. You could at least scent with some down or some feathers, and a lot of times that'll produce a feeding response.
Okay. Yeah, I just got some quail and I've been trying those, but his reaction to the quail was kind of similar to that of frozen thawed mice. Um, Cannot figure this guy out.
So he
When I
likes live.
loves live. Yeah, but even well, let me restate that. I'll tell you the full story. I got him first couple days he was here. He ate a frozen thawed mouse, no problem. And I was warned he wasn't doing so great with frozen thawed, so that I took that on, and I was like, great, he ate it. Then the next time, less interested. The next time, less interested. Ended up doing drop feeding, and that worked. Then I did drop feeding again, and he just left it. Had no interest in it whatsoever. It just sat there. Waited 5 days, tried drop feeding again. Same issue. So I got a live small mouse, dropped it in there, struck at it, scared the shit out of the mouse. Then he struck at it again and kind of half-ass wrapped it and then let it
Hmm.
go.
Hmm.
And then the final time he finally grabbed it, full-blown wrap and held it. I don't know what I call him our special boy because I don't know what his deal is, and he kind of had a similar response with the quail. I was dangling it around and it was strike, 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 then strike and half-ass wrap it, and then finally took it and wrapped it, and then I just got the hell out of Dodge so he could eat.
How old is the animal?
Almost a year.
Okay. Um, and when you offer it the thawed, is it warm or is it room temp or?
Oh yeah, it's warm. Yeah, I use hot water out of the tap, so the water temperature is probably 110. So by
Okay.
the time I get the mouse to him, it's probably about, anywhere from 90 to 100.
Yeah. How big is the animal?
Uh, Bigger than the female I got from you.
So a hopper sized mouse wouldn't be very big for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm anywhere between Hopper and small, but yeah, Hopper is probably less than the diameter of his body at the thickest point.
Yeah. You do get some like that, who they're more kind of defensive striking or not really in that feeding mode. You could try, maybe bumping down even a size from there. Sometimes if it's small enough where when they grab it or strike it and the bulk of it ends up in their mouth, they might be
Mm,
more likely to swallow it that way versus having to, strike and wrap and then go around and find the head to eat it.
yeah.
Um, I don't know. If it's only a year, and this is someone you got from someone else, maybe I don't know, maybe it's just going to take a little more time to settle into.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mind doing the live to a certain point, right? Like I don't want to eventually put an adult mouse in there that could, bite back or cause some harm. But
Did you
yeah,
say, have you tried rats?
I have not tried a rat yet. You think I should try
Yeah.
that?
Well, if it'll take a small adult mouse, that's a decent size for it. You could give it a rat fuzzy or a rat pup. I mean, there's going to be no risk there, of injuring the snake.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Oh yeah,
wouldn't be
good point.
terribly concerned about live. I don't have any adult carpets that have a preference for live. I'd say just getting it rolling, and feeding consistently. And then
Yeah,
usually once you kind of get over that hump, they'll take anything that's offered frozen.
yeah, yeah. He's so pretty. He's a little dumb. It's disappointing.
He'll
The
get there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not too worried about it. I mean, I'll start breeding quail if I have to, you know. But I don't know. Sometimes I wonder how much nutrition is in a quail. They have it's a lot of feathers, you know.
Yeah, it's leaner, and you definitely notice a difference usually, coming out the other end in my experience. But yeah, I don't know. I would try rat, and see whatever you can do to get it rolling. That's why I like to have the different prey items. I can try 5 different scents of rodent,
Yeah.
at varying sizes to get something off to the races. And
Live rat or frozen?
if its preferences for live, try it alive. It the thing is with the movement, I don't know, it kind of depends on the animal. The rat is going to have a very different movement than like a hopper mouse. It's not going to be all over the place or,
Yeah.
jumping. It's going to be, more crawling or, wiggling or rolling around. So
Yeah.
you might do like a pup, maybe something that's going to move a little bit more, something that's a little bit more mature.
Yeah.
But I would try that. If you can get it rolling on live, rats and just get it feeding consistently, you should be able to switch it over to thawed in the
Yeah.
future. I wouldn't be concerned about live. It may not be as convenient at this point since you're not producing your own, but
Yeah.
that's what you got to do if that's what it prefers. I wouldn't be concerned about doing that for now, you know, and thinking that, later on down the road, you're going to have problems switching it over to thawed because usually that's not the case.
Yeah. I got to take you up on those big rats that you said you had too, because I got that Argentine boa now, and I think she'd enjoy that. I think I gave her an extra large rat yesterday, and it hardly put a lump on her. I mean, you almost couldn't tell that she ate. So
Yeah, and my problem's getting worse. So I'll make you a heck of a deal. I have so many. I got them coming out of my ears. I can't find anybody down here to take a jumbo rat. Nobody down here has big pythons.
how big around are they?
Um, Let me see here. Probably like about like that, for a female, and the males can be a little bigger.
Yeah.
They're about usually 8 to 10 months old, somewhere in there.
Okay.
I don't weigh
Who
them, so I
knows?
couldn't tell you exactly, but I mean, it's a big, what they would probably sell. I haven't bought rodents in so long, but they call them like colossal or a 2 or 3XL. It's, they don't get much bigger than that.
I know there's going to be retic people that are going to listen to this and they'll be like, why am I not there?
And yeah, sorry, I can't ship. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this problem.
Yeah. I got a question for you. What's your favorite snake of all time? Doesn't have to be something you own. Could be something. Well, I don't want it to be extinct. It's got to be alive, because otherwise, I'd say like Titanoboa. That'd be awesome.
I'd have to go with the carpet python. That's what drew me into keeping. I can still remember the first one that I was introduced to that got me into it. And that's still, the heart of what I focus on. I've never been bored with them. I've only grown, and in the carpets that I keep and the different types that I work with. And that's still right at the heart of what's up there.
Which one of the carpet pythons? Like if you could have one snake, if somebody said you had to get rid of everything and you could only have one snake, which one would it be?
I guess that's a little harder. I've always been partial like to the one that brought me in. It's the classic bright yellow, dark black 50-50 banded jungle type look.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I got my Papuan carpet, I saw him and I was like, oh, maybe he's going to get more colorful as he gets older and maybe he'll get more yellows. And I was thinking like, what am I doing? I'm wishing that this animal would turn into a jungle carpet, like I'm wishing it would turn into something else. And then I just leaned into the jungle carpets. Cause like you said, that the dark velvety blacks and even when you get the yellow tipping in there,
mm-hmm.
that's beautiful too. It's like I love both extremes there. I love the yellow tipping, but I love just pure velvet black banding, and
yeah,
man, there's so much to love there. That high contrast.
Yeah, it's tough to narrow it down, like you said. I mean, and that's what's neat about the carpets is with all the different subspecies and phenotypes that are out there, you don't have to try to make one thing look like something else. You can have both or all,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, and I appreciate my Papuan more now, cause it's like, all right, I got the jungles, so I'm interested to see what he's going to look like, and I've noticed with them, they really fire up and have a different color from one time to the next. The jungles, they're just kind of always yellow and black,
Yeah, I agree. I don't really see that in any of them, with the exception of the Papuans, like you said, and the inlands as well. The inlands, I say, are probably the most noticeable post shed compared to when they haven't had a fresh shed. When after they shed, they look so much different than they did maybe a few weeks prior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. And they going into a shed, they can look so terrible before they even go opaque and you're like, "Oh man, you look like trash."
Do you plan on adding any more carpets in the future?
Papuans or just in general?
Yeah, or anything?
Definitely want to get another jungle, and I don't know. I have a female spotted python, and I'm thinking about getting a male just to have a pair.
Mm-hmm.
I toy with the idea of getting another female Timor at some point. The trio I have right now are from Ryan Young. So
Right.
if somebody captive produced a Timor python and had a female available, I'd have a hard time not getting that animal. But at the same time, I was talking to Stephen Cush last weekend, and he was saying that he's seen Timors that were absolutely enormous. I think that I forget where he said he saw it, if it was the San Diego Zoo or something, but he said it was huge. Like he thought it was a retic. It was so big. So that kind of that's a little off-putting.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't worked with any myself, but like anything, there's probably going to be quite a spectrum, size an animal can achieve. And I think a lot of times, especially us as Americans, we probably give more calories to an animal than it needs or would get in the wild, not to say we should underfeed or be overly conservative with feeding, but at the same time, I think in general, a lot of times we overfeed ourselves and we probably pass those bad habits on to the animals we care for.
Yeah. And when I was talking to Kush about that, I said maybe, that could definitely be the feeding that they're seeing at the zoo there, because you got to figure there's no end to the rodents that they can provide, so it's just like, yeah, she's always hungry, feed her more.
How old are your
So
Timors? They're still pretty young.
yeah, I got a pair of 23s, and I have the extra male I got is a 22. So yeah, they're all around
Okay.
1 or 2 years old.
Okay.
So,
Very
and
cool.
I'd love to produce them, but it's a pipe dream, but I love that animal. They're so cool.
Yeah. I've only met one in person and never worked with any myself, but I agree. Very, very unique, very cool Python.
Yeah, I'm hoping it seems like the more time I spend with them, the more they mellow out. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, they're just going to keep getting more and more mellow. And, the flea and pee doesn't really happen anymore. So that's a
Oh,
good thing.
nice.
And
Okay.
yeah, I even have, if they're in shed, that's a different story. But, who can blame them? They probably feel terrible and they can't see anything and all that. And, but the female, she got some substrate stuck up under her lips because she's going into shed right now, and
Mhm.
she likes to burrow and go under her substrate and explore and everything. And I was talking to Ryan about it, and he said, yeah, just clean out what you can. And I cleaned everything out, and she didn't even pee on me. So I'm sitting there holding her head, going up under her gums, getting the substrate out, and it didn't piss her off enough to piss on me. So that was cool.
Yeah, if you're able to do that, and mess with her and manipulate her that much and she didn't, then maybe you
Yeah.
are full well past that stage. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you have to just go for it. Like if you're going to pick them up, you can't mess around. Once they start moving away from you, then it's like they go into that fight or flight mode, and it's full blown flight. And then I think that's
Hmm.
when it's more likely to happen. So it's just kind of going in there with confidence and just kind of scoop them up and get them out. And usually within 5 or 10 seconds, they're
Hmm.
curious and
Okay.
exploring.
Okay.
What about you? Do you have any projects that you're working on, or anything you're really excited about, or new animals you plan on getting?
I'm not really planning on adding anything new. I do need to find a male rough scale python. Um, 'Cause right now I just have one female, and at some point I would like to have more of them. But as far as what I'm excited about, um, yeah, everything. I mean, I that's why I think I work with the type of collection that I do. Is I love the diversity and having as you're kind of working through, cleaning everything, observing, interacting. It's all kinds of different things to keep my interest. I don't have plans to move out of any projects or really add much new. I have plenty to keep me interested in, but I am excited for hopefully some more Brettles this year. Last year I got my first clutch of Brettles and trying a couple pairings this year. So I'm hoping to get some more of those on the ground.
Nice. What about the diamonds? How many did you say you had of them?
Just 3 at this point.
Do you plan on breeding them or
in the future? My oldest female isn't ready, and probably, I don't even know if she'll be ready next year. She'll probably need 2 more years. And I'm still kind of figuring out, I want to switch up my wintering strategy. So I'm figuring out how I want to do that this year. So yeah, just a few of those for now.
Have you ever thought about keeping them outside?
Yeah. Of course, down here in Florida, right? We're definitely set up for it. I just, it's not something I've ever done before. And yeah, that's one thing I've been kicking around. Do I want to do, like an outside type setup, an inside outside, an inside trying to bring the outside inside?
Yeah.
I have a lot to mull over still.
Yeah, that would be cool. If anything, for the diamonds, it gets too hot in the summer for them, right? I mean, that's what I would think.
Yeah, that's what you would think, but then you got Tom Crutchfield further south in Florida than us, who's been doing it for years and has been very successful and consistent with them. And they're being exposed. I mean, down there I believe he's in the Miami area or somewhere, maybe a little north of there. It's probably hotter than what we get here. It can't get that low at night. So it kind of throws a wrench in that line of thinking. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I saw a video of Dave Palumbo keeping diamonds outside, putting them in an outdoor enclosure.
Oh yeah.
So he's supposed to be coming on the podcast. I want to talk to him about that, see if how he keeps them outside.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think as long as for them, there's a lot of people much more experienced that could speak well to, their experience and their success with diamonds than I can. But I think as long as you give them, you can heat them up, allow them to heat up as much as they want, as long as they have the opportunity, like anything, to get away from it.
Yeah.
And you're just not running them as hot as everything else in general, giving them a lower ambient and lower temperatures, maybe to cool off at night. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see. Ask me in 5 or 10 years, and we'll see how it's working out.
I'll probably ask you in 5 or 10 weeks.
Yeah, but if you're thinking about adding another type of carpet, I mean, that diamonds, along with the jungles, they're a really special, really unique animal. Very enjoyable to work with.
They're so cool. And the thing is, though, is when I look on like Morph Market and everything, I have a hard time finding the diamond python that I would want. Like I look through the more complete carpet python and I see some examples where I'm like, that's the one I want. Lots of black, as like really, really dark with bigger spots. That's what I'm really drawn towards. I feel like a lot of the ones I see are lighter in color, with more of the yellows and things in there. So
you mentioned your interest in that kind of tipping look.
Yeah.
And I can't think of an ugly diamond I've ever seen. Like, if you have one, regardless of if it's higher white or higher yellow or bigger or smaller rosettes, like I would all but guarantee, like you're gonna dig it. For
sure. I love all snakes, especially once they're in my hand. Then I'm like, this is the best snake I've ever had. The one I just got.
Right. Until the next one.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man. Well, where can people find you at? Your social medias and everything? You're on Morph Market too?
Yeah, so I have a website, T as in Tom, D as in David, Morelia.com. I'm on Facebook, Tierra de Morelia. Instagram, same handle, TIERRADEMORELIA. I do have a Morph Market store as well.
All right, I've been mispronouncing your business name. I just realized because I say Tierra de Morelia.
Well, yeah, that's how it sounds if you don't roll your R, right?
Where'd you come up with that name?
Well, Morelia, right? So that's
Sure.
the apple of my eye. And when I started out, I don't know. I just wanted a name that was kind of unique, and wasn't, maybe like my initials or something different. And that one, just kind of came to me and it stuck.
What's the meaning?
Land of Morelia is what it translates to.
Right on. That's perfect.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun talking to you. And
Yeah.
I'll have to hit you up for some rodents and I'm sure more snakes.
Yeah.
As long as my wife's not listening.
You edit that part out, right? But
yeah.
No, I appreciate you having me, Adam. It's been fun. It's always fun chatting, and it's good to have a snake friend here locally. So I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Hell yeah. All right, man. Thanks.
All right. Have a good rest of your weekend.
You too.